When you were a child, did you play video games? What kinds of games did you play? What kinds of messages or ideologies did you learn from your games? 1/2 of the US population play video games. This is about 150 million Americans. 42% of those who play video games play 3 hours or more each week. This just tells you just how much video games are part of our media consumption. Video games as an industry surpasses all other entertainment industries except music. Video games make about $23 billion in profits each year. There's been several studies trying to denote what kind of effects video games have on us as people in terms of our ideas and our actions. Scientists have found that video games do have cultural effects. Video games contribute to a culture of aggressive subjectivity and play. There's been several studies about playing video games and resulting violence among children. And while the correlations between violent media exposure and aggression were only in small to moderate range, such correlations were nonetheless stronger than the association between passive smoking and lung cancer, and many municipalities have banned smoking because of that risk. And this is coming from the American Academy of Pediatrics. So although we have all these restrictions and these warnings on cigarettes that it produces outcomes like lung cancer, there are no warnings for video games. We can simply choose or not to choose to play violent video games. Social scientists say that violent video games reinforce unjust social relations, that there's a hierarchy of power evident in video games. In particular, video games uphold masculine fantasies of domination, that men use violence to control. We also see fetishism of capitalism and technology, not only in the video game world, but we'll see also in the war machine. The overall effects of video games include addiction and propensity towards violence. Video games have continued to serve as potent conduits of the ideas and discourses most conducive to maintaining the status quo. The video game industry both mirrors and strengthens existing power relations in society, conforming reality to prevailing ideologies, social expectations, and collective fantasies. We see in particular in terms of inequality and ideologies prevalent in video games, we see misogyny and violence against women. Heroes conform to hegemonic forms of masculinity. By essentially inviting male players to participate in stimulated atrocities against women, such games trivialize and valorize gender violence. It may also dull players' empathetic responses to real-world victims of violence. What we see in terms of video games, the violence produced there is very similar to the conventions of porn. It's addictive. Women who are also gamers have been attacked. And one case is the Gamergate controversy. You can watch the video pertaining to that in the resources. Other types of inequalities and ideologies prevalent in video games are racist representations. Black and Latinx communities are depicted disproportionately as drug kingpins and prostitutes. Asian individuals are portrayed as martial artists or villains. Arabs and Persians are seen as bloodthirsty savages and terrorists. And most commonly, whites are seen as saviors. So we see that video games are not just mere entertainment, they perpetuate ideologies. Video games are notably more persuasive as mechanisms of social indoctrination and control than any other media. Medium is the message. What McCullough meant is that radio, television, and so on are not neutral carriers of meaning, but themselves intensify, magnify, or otherwise alter the scale of our relations with one another. The logics that drive our video games make claims about who we are, how our world functions, and what we want to become. Video games spread simulations that have psychological effects. We see that video games are used in training for many occupations, even training mass murderers. We see the training of mass murderers more prominently in the Columbine massacre that happened around 1999. Video games also provide war simulations and the militarization of everyday life. The United States has invested billions of dollars in war simulations to train soldiers to kill. Video games help commanders engage in more effective battlefield tactics and strategies. And the first games that produced this include Space War. You can watch a video about that in the resources provided. The video game industry developed organically out of what President Dwight D. Eisenhower termed the military-industrial complex, the institutional nexus or combination, the intersection between the national security state, private military contractors, and academia. Video games also help the military-industrial complex by recruiting youth to join the military. These games are used to condition soldiers to show them what battlefield life could be like. They do this by running large-scale battlefield simulations. Game designers scrupulously model games on the latest in U.S. military doctrine, equipment, and weaponry. Some game companies even manufacture hardware and software for real-world weapon systems. The military-industrial entertainment complex in this manner integrates entertainment and killing. Video games normalize and dehistoricize state violence and demonize authorized enemies of the United States. The industrial military state entertainment complex works because the Pentagon has responded by integrating Xbox with Wii controllers into a growing number of its weapon systems and robotics control. There is a blurring now of reality and a fictionalized world. The result is a new Orientalism in which the gamer is involved in the military shooter set in the Middle East, is forever performing strategic containment of the other, the dark-skinned barbarian perpetually threatening the innocent redoubt of Western civilization. So again, this is talking about how video games perform or produce ideologies against the other, in this case, people from the Middle East, looking at them as villains or monsters that deserve to be taken out due to the terrorism in our society. We see that these ideologies, this gaming, these worlds are breaking down the boundaries between military and civilian life. Video games are contributing to the instrumental manipulation of the world. Video games have control of representational world and what we believe in these imaginations. Even when the content of video games is not overtly violent, the medium conveys an educative message that is instrumental manipulation of the world, self, and other is both natural and desirable. The cognitive and behavioral modality built into the overwhelming majority of video games is control of the representational world, rather than an attitude of receptivity towards it. There is an instrumental reason for this, a form of subjectivity, consciousness, and action in which the entirety of the living world and cosmos gets treated as a thing to be manipulated or even destroyed at will. Instrumentalizing of the world, rationalization, mathematization of nature is what's happening in the military, industrial, entertainment world. Virtual reality leads to the subject's disembodiment, her estrangement from real sensuous world. The instrumentalist conception of the world achieves its fullest representational expression in first-person shooter games, where the subject's interaction with others is typically represented by a disembodied weapon floating in midair. We're simply not connected to reality anymore. Embodying such conceptions of life is what can only be described as neoliberal ideological framework, where people are humans anymore, but just simply objects. And we are taking out or eliminating, destroying these objects for our good, for our benefit. The computer video game is in many ways the ideal commodity of post-Fordism capitalism, the exemplary form of a system that now requires a ceaseless stream of new commodities with ever-shortening product cycles and lifespan, if it is so to avoid systemic crisis and breakdown.